Yeah, we're live. It is a little bit late, 7:36. Got the fan going. It's warm today. Just got back, took Milo for a walk. It was awesome. I'd like to try to get him out. He's like 14 or something. So more than 14 now. So he's doing good. He's hanging in there. He's going for walks. He's excited. It's all good. So today I want to talk about intercooling, and not intercooling generally, but intercooling specifically on an application that we tested it on. And I've done, those of you who have been following the channel know that I still have original owner 5-liter Mustang, 1988 5-liter LX. Bought it new in November or so of 87. And it's a California only car, or a California 88 car, meaning the first year of the Mass Air is California only, and then later on they introduced Mass Air to they let it loose on the rest of the unsuspecting world. I didn't even know that when I bought the car. I didn't know that they were switching over, and I didn't know that they were only doing it on the California cars to begin with. I just wanted that Mustang because I was going to go show them stock racing, and the rest is history. But I still have the car. But fairly early on, and I did showroom stock racing with it, but fairly early on, I was introduced to the Silver State race. And that, for those of you that are not familiar with it, that is an open road race out in Nevada. They close the road for about 90 something miles, and then let you run from Lund to Hiko, I think are the two roads. It's technically it's outside of both of those, but you get to run basically in the middle of the desert and go as fast as you want, or as fast as they'll allow you to go, given your level of safety equipment. So you have to have, the faster guys have to have, just like you would expect, and would make certainly common sense, have to have roll cages and fuel cells and the right kind of, driver's equipment, helmets, and all that stuff. And so it's very, very important to, safety first is always good. But I went out and ran that with the motor naturally aspirated a couple of years, and it was fun, and it did well, and it just would go, and it would essentially just go out and run wide open throttle, particularly in fifth gear, and it would just run forever until it ran out of gas. Basically, it didn't care. Running it in fourth gear caused more of a problem. That car came with, I special ordered the 308 gear set, which was optional, and that car would run when it was NA, and just the first time I went out, it just had kind of headers on it, but it would run 41 or 4200 RPM, I think, in fifth gear, and then it would run like near 6,000 in fourth gear. And so what would happen is it would tend to heat up. But only in fourth gear, if I would try to run it with more RPM in fourth gear, but running in fifth gear, it just like at between 4,000, 42 or 4,300, depending on whether I was going up or down a hill or whatever, it would just run forever like that. Didn't care, just go out. I drove it out to the race, several hundred miles there and back, and then drove it in the race, and it all worked out perfect. But the first year that I was there, I think Pratt Cole won in a Testarossa, and I realized that, hey, if somebody had a Mustang like I have, and you modified it a little bit, and my car had a cage and everything in it, and you modified it a little bit, it certainly could run as fast as that Testarossa did. And eventually we would get it up to that kind of speed. In fact, we would get it up to way more than that. But so the Kip Kington, may he rest in peace, was the guy that got me involved in this, because I started I ended up doing a story from him after this on this race. But he got me hooked up with the guys from Vortec and said, hey, look, you guys should do something with this guy, and we'll do stories on it, and blah, 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 blah. And the whole magazine thing started, but we put a Vortec supercharger on there. And, fast forward, I don't know, several years anyway, we started looking into, we looked into it actually almost immediately. Within the first year, I think, they were already interested in intercooling and stuff. But what I want to talk about is a test that I did a few years back, where we were running the intercooler, or aftercooler, or power cooler, or charge cooler, whatever they're calling it. And it's an air to water intercooler. And it's a setup that they designed to work with the core size and the bends and everything that kind of goes right in place on a Fox Mustang. We also ran it on a 351 Windsor because you just have to move the kit a little bit and change the belt length. We just made all that happen on the dyno, and then we ran the intercooler on it. And the interesting thing about this is that, and I didn't really think about this going in, because when all of this stuff was being designed, it was being designed way back when we were making 200 or 300 or 400 horsepower. And later on, obviously the racers would be making a lot more than that, but the intercooler was sized and designed to run a blower on a stock, a stock or mild 5-liter Mustang engine, and then put an intercooler on it, and then you could run, more boost and all that, and that would be good. So we'll talk first about intercooling, obviously, in general. So if you're putting an intercooler on anything, the idea is to lower the charge temperature, and then that way it makes more power because the cooler air is better. It also, changes the detonation threshold, so it'd be less likely to detonate. So let's say you were driving around on the street and you were running pump gas in it, and you can only run, let's pick a number, let's say 20 degrees of timing. And then with the intercooler, now you can run 22 degrees or 23 degrees or whatever the number is, more at any rate. And then you pick up power from having extra timing, making more power. All that checks out. All that works out good. And that's exactly what this setup would do. What I found when I tested it on this 351 is that we tested it at a power level that was beyond its design capability, really beyond its flow capability. So it was cooling the charge well enough, but the problem is that we were getting pressure buildup, between the blower and the intercooler, and then we were not seeing the same amount of boost on the other side of the intercooler in the manifold. And so because on the engine dyno, we were also running good gas in this thing. We were running a mixture of 91 and 100, so it allowed us to do what we wanted to do essentially with the timing. We also ran this thing, we took the intercooler off and ran it non-intercooled, and lo and behold, it made more power. Well, it made more power because it had more boost in the manifold. So the intercooler itself was a restriction. So when we're talking about intercooling, like with most things that we've talked about on this channel, we need to not focus on one thing. Intercooling is good, and I always recommend it, but it has to be done correctly. You can't put a tiny little intercooler like the one that I had on my Chevy Sprint Turbo. You can't, just because it says intercooled on it, or because it has an intercooler, doesn't mean that it has an efficient one. The Dodge Omni that I have, that I'm going to be bringing back here before too long, I'm going to go out and see Brian Ben again from the Car Farm. I'm excited about it. But the factory intercooler on there is obviously better than the previous generation non-intercooled motors, but it's not great. There are much better intercoolers for any kind of factory turbo combination. In fact, I was just looking at a bunch of them today that I did with the guys from CX Racing. We put a front mount on a Supra, which I had forgotten about. We did one on a Mazda Speed 3. We did a bunch of Honda ones. We did a Mustang engine, a V8 one. So lots of those things. So an intercooler is always a good idea, and lowering the charge temperature is a good idea, as long as a turbo or as long as the intercooler is sized to do that. The other thing that you have to think about is on a turbo, if you're taking your wastegate reference line in the manifold and you're saying, okay, I want the wastegate to open at 10 pounds because I only want to make 10 pounds in the manifold, even if the intercooler is a little bit restrictive, it's still going to make 10 pounds in the manifold because it's not going to open until you hit 10 pounds. So the turbo will just speed up more and try to overcome that restriction. On a centrifugal supercharger like the Vortec that we tested on the 351, that doesn't happen. If there's a restriction, the blower just flows less because it's spun the same speed relative to the engine because it's mechanically coupled with a belt. It's coupled to the engine. So whatever the drive ratio is, the combination of the pulley drive ratio and then the internal drive ratio inside the blower is going to determine, and then the engine speed is going to determine what the impeller speed is, and that's going to determine the flow rate. And then relative to the NA power of the motor, that's going to determine the boost level, and away you go. If you restrict that, putting something between the blower and the engine that's restricting flow, you're going to have a restriction in flow and you're going to have a restriction in power. Now, it should be pointed out, the intercooler itself, because it is going to lower the temperature, you are going to see a drop in boost across the intercooler. You have to. That's just science. You might see some, and it's not going to be very much, but you might see some just from the change in temperature because colder air is more dense. You also might see some because of restriction. In our case, we saw quite a bit from this intercooler when we ran it on the 351 because the 351 was already making, between 425 and 450 horsepower NA. So it's making more than had I just taken a Vortex supercharger and put it on my 5-liter Mustang engine. This 351 is already making more than that. And then we add the Vortex on top of that. And then we're talking about, getting up near 600 and then exceeding 600 horsepower on this combination, which is not hard to do. And then the blower that we were testing it with, I think was an S trim or something, had way more capability than that. It had more flow rate. Had we spun it faster, it could have definitely made more power. But going through that small air-to-water intercooler presented a problem. It was a restriction. And then when we took it off and just put our discharge tube connecting the supercharger right to the throttle body on our motor, or you could plumb it to a blow-through carburetor, however you wanted to do it. But we got rid of the smaller intercooler, and then it obviously it made more power that way. Now the charge temperature was definitely higher. So the ideal situation is a marriage of both of those things, and that's exactly what we did. What we did was took a 1,000 horsepower intercooler core this one we got from the guys at CX Racing, which I had used for a lot of things, and we ran that. And so we had all our discharge air going, through that intercooler core and then into the motor. And then by eliminating the restriction, then it made even more power. so that with that intercooler, it made more power than it did non-intercooled, made a lot more power than it did with the smaller intercooler, and it had a lower charge temperature. So not just from a power standpoint, but also now we had a much lower charge temperature. So in addition to it making more power, it would be much less susceptible to detonation too. So if you're driving around on the street and you don't have the cold air intake like Richard always tells you to put on there, you should not have an open filter on there, particularly on a 5-liter Mustang that has a mass air meter. That's going to be a real problem. But you should have some sort of cold air going into the blower. But then when you're compressing the air, it's going to heat up. You want it to go through an intercooler simply because you don't want to have detonation. So you want to eliminate that. And then the other things like, potentially added power and stuff. And then also the ability to run more timing, as we talked about, because you have colder air. And then the ability, if you wanted to, in addition to the timing, because now you have colder air, now you could turn the boost up and then make even more power. So all of that works good. So that's why 2 big thumbs up for intercooling. It would be, it's beneficial always to have that. But like I said, in this particular instance, when we did this test, we saw obviously a change in power. And so non-intercooled was better than intercooled. The problem is that and I've put that video up already, that if you put those kinds of videos up, then you'll get people that don't want to run intercooled say, oh, on that test, you did non-intercooled made more power. Yeah, it did. But we got to talk about why it did that, because there's science behind that. So get an intercooler. Always intercoolers, always ring gap. Do and do as I say, not as I do, because I've done. In fact, I ran my Mustang in the Silver State many, many times with no intercooler, but we did have a cold air going to it. And the charge temperature was about 135 degrees at 7 pounds and stayed that way until we let off the gas, and then went through the narrows and then back up to it. And it was right there. So it was great having, that was my first real, certainly for any length of time, that was my first real bit of data logging that we could look at. And it was thanks to the guys at Kenny Bell who set that up. So we could data log this setup and then look at all the data. For them, there wasn't a lot to look at. There was like a wide open throttle. The TPS was at wide open throttle. In fact, when I brought the data back, they're like, something's wrong with your TPS. It's broken. I'm like, no, it's not broken. They said, well, yeah, you're at wide open throttle. It says for 32 minutes. I said, yeah, that's what this race is. That's what it's like. They're like, you never lifted off? I'm like, no, not until we got to that one spot where you have to lift off. they're like, we were certain that the TPS just went to full and then broke, and then that's the way that it was. I said, no, watch. I said, watch. We'll come up to about 65 miles in or whatever. We'll come up to an area where it's 70 miles. I said something like that. We'll come up to an area where we're off the throttle, and then we're back on. And so that was good data logging. So we could look at the charge temperature. We could look at RPM. We could look at we had ambient air. We had, I don't remember if we had timing or any of that stuff. I'll have to take a look, and I think maybe I was just asking for them to do boost and charge temperature stuff, which we got all of that. Okay, very simple. Does an intercooler always help power? The answer is no. Eric, Jet, Bernard, Maine, all the way out there in Maine. Is Gloucester out there? Is that in Maine? Cold air intake, not quite intercooled yet. That's a good start, though. Silver State, road race. Tap the festive like balloon. Good morning. Oh, Western Australia. That's right. Good day. It is a good day, right? Long Island, New York's in the house. Silver State ones like them are awesome. Yeah, the Battle Mountain was also one of those. And then the first one actually that I did even before the Silver State was the La Carrera, which was down in Mexico. Tim, what's going on? Try hit a 134. I'm going to put some more Freon in my truck too. It's not as cold as I want it to be. Butcher, what's going on? Just watch the video. Can I send you max speeding rod, small block Ford roller retrofit lifters to check out? They're $100 versus $700. $700 plus for all the other retrofit lifters. I wouldn't be able to tell anything by looking at them. And I'm sure Max Speeding Rod would send me some if I wanted to test them. If they're $100, I'm a little skeptical. Rich, have a stock 68 307, factory sealed, cast iron exhaust manifolds. I have 2-inch mufflers in and out, then 3-inch, then 2.5 or 2 1/4. Cherry bombs, nice. Do the different size tubes kill noticeable power in a daily? No, if you're is this 307 even a 4-barrel motor? Because I thought most of the 307s would have been factory 2-barrel motors, and it has stock cast iron exhaust manifolds, and it has stock heads on it, and it has a stock cam. You have 2-inch mufflers in and out, then 3-inch, and then 2 1/4. Your mufflers are going to be the most restrictive thing, although I suspect that the outlet out of your exhaust manifolds, now the exhaust is going to be hotter there, so it should flow more there, but your exhaust manifolds might not be 2 inches, right? Considering turning on the fan. Yeah, we run the fan on our screen door, and we just turned it on at night so it draws the cooler air into our room. It's okay. It's going to start turning cold here before too long. You mean it made more power on less pounds? No, I don't mean that. When we went to non-intercooled, it had higher boost. Richard, super excited to make a live finally. Sean, what's up? I made it through my 70 hours of videos in preparation for my LS swap. So you should be an expert now, right? I would think having a restrictive intercooler would increase charge temperature before the intercooler, further negating the benefit of the cooler. Yeah, if you have a higher boost level before the intercooler going into the intercooler, the temperature will be higher going in. And so the outlet temperature could also be higher unless you have excess cooling in the core. Lift at the bump. Intercooler kills quite a bit of power if you're not boosting. Yeah, that would not be a good choice. Does the location of the throttle body affect anything in the context of volume and throttle response? For NA motors, a lot of road race cars like individual throttle assemblies. I personally think that they're getting most of their power from the fact that it's an IR manifold and has no plenum, but they like the throttle blades down in the port closer to the valve because they're saying that it's more responsive that way. On a turbo application with a common plenum, that's not really a thing. Utah's in the house. Dean. They still do the La Carrera. I don't think they do the La Carrera anymore. Have you seen the Thunderhead 289 video of putting a carb on a long plenum space thing? It's the triangle of virtue. Is that the Warriors of Virtue? Question on 3800 supercharged series 2 on the original motor, 270,000 miles, but it will sputter at higher RPM. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. You had me right until then. Richard has 302,000 fans. I would say that that's a conspiracy theory, right? Virtuous circle. It's a circle of life. Very similar to the worries of virtue. I just read something today that I had no idea. For this whole time, I thought that I remember having this conversation many times in the past. So I was commenting to or responding to a comment that I got on one of the stories, and somebody was saying something about making the Kessel run, and or the Millennium Falcon. They made a Millennium Falcon reference. So I said, well, yeah, I made the Kessel run in 12 parsecs. And for the longest time, when this first came out, like, it was a huge red flag for me. I'm like, well, a parsec is a measurement of is like a land measurement. It's not a speed measurement. So did George Lucas just get that wrong? Did he nail everything else in Star Wars and get that wrong? And as it turns out, he did not. He was right in saying what he said, because Han Solo doing the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs, it wasn't a measurement of time. It was actually a measurement of distance. It was the route that he took to do this. And I didn't know that until now. That was 1977. That's how long I've been dumb. And not only have I been dumb, but I've been certain that I've been right. So that's like the worst kind of dumb. Regarding the 307, yes, 2-barrel and smaller than 2-inch cast exhaust manifold outlets, inch and 7/8 or inch and 3/4. I thought that they were pretty small. Most of the ones I've seen are small. Have aluminum 4-barrel to add. Should they get heads work or aluminum heads? Weekend work 86 C10 with tire smoke dreams. Here's what I can tell you. The exhaust is not hurting you at all. It's not hurting you with your setup. Mostly because you're not asking it to flow a lot of air. Particularly, it flows the most air at higher engine speeds. The 2-barrel is already restricting it for that, so that's not a problem. Your exhaust manifolds are also already restricting that. If you want to make, like a tire turning kind of thing, a 4-barrel and headers would be a good idea. If you can find also, I don't remember what year you said your 307 was. Does it have high compression? If it doesn't have high compression, try to find a set of aluminum L98 heads. You can get them from the wrecking yard. They have them in wrecking yards. We see them all the time. All the time. We see tune port motors there a lot. So they have aluminum L98 heads if they're later than 86 on a convertible. So if you put those on, you'll have smaller chambers. They flow at least as good or better than the heads that you're taking off of there. Put a 4-barrel intake manifold, a 4-barrel carburetor, put heads. If you've got it apart, you can put a small camshaft in it, like a low buck truck kind of camshaft. You know, a 206, 212, a 212, 218 kind of thing. You know, an RV style camshaft, and your little 307 will be spinning the tires. Been running no intercooler on a 5.3 with the GT45 for 2 years. Intake temps get real hot, but no issue. Makes over 600. Yeah, I would just make sure, like in those instances, I try to offset the no intercooler thing with something else, like the 85, like a good dedicated cold air, like not running a lot of boost, and also not running it for a really long time. It will take these kinds of charge temperatures, you know, for short periods of time, and just don't be doing roll racing on the freeway and stuff. It's got it where it counts, kid. It does. It really does. I never thought I'd be smuggling myself. Time aligning all the waves inside an intake manifold seems a more and more monumental task the more I think about it. Time aligning them. Well, the problem is that you have offsetting reflected waves, because you have primary, secondary, tertiary waves of reflected waves. You have inertial ram going on. You have Helmholtz resonance. There's a lot of cross-bogenation going on there that cancels things out. And there's almost no way around it. That's why it takes, like when they do modeling in a single cylinder, that's one thing. But then when you have multiple cylinders, you have these things happening a lot. And like I said, overlapping. That's why it takes, you know, I would say Cray supercomputer, except that that's dating me by a lot. It takes a real computer to figure out all that stuff. Did you ever run duct tape drags with the Roadkill boys? I've never been there. I'd like to go there. I wish I had something that I could go drag race. Maybe the Omni could go there. Can we meet at Little Caesars and build a junkyard 5-liter 5.3 in the parking lot? Well, the 5.3 junkyard 5.3 builds itself. It's already, that's the nice thing about them, is that you just go get them from the wrecking yard and they're ready to go. Sometimes you have to clean them, but that's not bad. Should have went plaid. We got there faster. That's right. That is the fastest speed known. Just explain Spaceballs to wifey the other day, speaking of plaid. That's a hard thing to explain to somebody that wasn't also into Star Wars, or that didn't appreciate Star Wars. Water-cooled turbos. Water-cooled turbos are good mostly for the heat that gets imparted into the turbo and for the longevity of the turbo itself. I would honestly doubt that a water-cooled center section does much, if anything, to charge temperature. There, I said it. I said what I said. 307, the exhaust manifold is a stock 86 350 cast iron manifolds. Look for L98 heads and long mid shorty headers. Have an RV cam. All this is free, so you can buy a few parts. And definitely get long tube headers. Contrary to what happened with the V6, which is the first time in 30 years that I've ever seen that happen, long tube headers are the way to go for low speed torque. It does take quite a computer to program to simulate acoustics of any kind, never mind intakes. I think the layman could get close with some sort of wavefront simulator that visualizes the waves. I don't know that he would, because you'd have to have multiple ones. And so I don't know how they would do that. And then the frequencies would change with engine speed. And so it's, like I said, it's a lot. The non-intercooled 5.3, yes, I run E85. Thumbs up for that. I do have fun on the street with it, but it's mostly a quarter-mile strip scenario where I see those temps get really hot. Yeah, you on an 1/8 mile thing, you can get away with a lot more than you can with a quarter mile. And with a quarter mile, you can get away with a lot of things that you can't get away with, like doing a roll race. And certainly Bonneville and certainly the Silver State would be kind of the extreme of that. Water cooled turbo on the dyno test. Yeah, we could try that. I've run water cooled turbos on the dyno before. I don't remember running one to compare charge temperature though. My little GT 3037s are water cooled. I'm almost finished slapping the twin turbo 64 Impala together. Should be on the road in a week or so. That's awesome. I'm a big fan of water cooled center sections. Again, mostly for longevity, but now maybe if you were running Le Mans or the Silver State, they're not the same. But if you're running the Silver State and you're running wide open throttle and your foot was mashed to the floor for half an hour, maybe water cooled center sections would show a difference there. At least the guy could see when and where the wave fronts meet each other, whether they exit the plenum without weird cancellations and resonance happening. Yeah, more data is always better. The one thing that a wave front is not going to show you inertial ram, though, I don't think. Or 155 degrees, making 13 pounds. I'm looking at some kind of intercooler or water meth. I really hate to cut up my car more than I have to. 155 degrees at 13 pounds. What is your ambient? That seems like you're about 100 degrees off from where you should be, unless you have an intercooler on already. Correction: water-cooled turbo versus air-to-air intercooler. I know for certain that a water-cooled turbo, a water-cooled center section turbo, is not going to be anywhere near the charge temperature that an air-to-air intercooler is. A water-cooled turbo is just essentially a non-intercooled versus an intercooled test. If there was a change from a water-cooled center section, again, we run the same thing here. There's not time for a change in that temperature to impart itself into the air. And so I just don't think you'll see anything, but we could try it. Do you know what transmissions are able to bolt up to an RO7? I don't know what bell housing that is. I don't know if they would have picked something different than the small block Chevy bell housing, since all of the stuff was kind of designed for that. But maybe they would have done a dedicated bell housing to make it smaller and more compact. I'm not sure. .307 is nicknamed 307. So we'll name it the Holder Down small block. I don't have any 307 recipes, so I think I like your name better. You got to pick a resistance wave. I didn't know that. I'm just repeating Darren Morgan's things. What are we picking a resistance wave for? If you haven't, and you're interested in these wave formations and what's happening really inside an intake manifold, you need to go online and you need to search for John Causey's Advanced Engine Technology Conference demonstration that he did, where he made a clear tube and then stuck his finger in the intake while they were making dyno runs. And you can see the fluttering of his finger, which are, because a lot of people don't realize that these waves are traveling back and forth. That's how they work. That's how a reflected wave works. That's why we call it a reflected wave, because it travels out as a negative pressure wave and travels back as a positive pressure wave. That's the primary one. Then it travels back as a negative pressure wave, travels back as a primary one. The amplitude has come down on the secondary wave, and then the third. And then depending how much time you have, this continues to go on. But you can see the fluttering in his finger from all of this stuff happening, and it's crazy. About how much parasitic loss and power is there from a crank to the wheels on all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive truck application? That depends on a lot of things. You can have there be very little from one to the other if you equip the engine on the engine dyno with the factory, with whatever air intake you're running in the car, with whatever exhaust you're running in the car, with whatever accessories you're running in the car, the temperature that you're running it in the car, with the tune that you're running it in the car. And then all you're doing is running you're just looking at the parasitic loss from whatever the drivetrain is. If that's the only change, that's one thing. If the other things are changed, that's another thing. And then what specific drivetrain you're using has a big effect. A trophy truck could lose hundreds of horsepower going from the engine dyno to the drivetrain because it has super giant everything, mostly gigantic wheels and tires that are really, really heavy. And so you can lose a ton of power. It's not a percentage. It's an amount plus, additional some other minor frictional losses based on the power output of the motor. That's a minor thing. Almost all of it are the components that you choose to put behind the engine. Different transmissions. A manual trans is more efficient than an automatic trans. Different kinds of automatic transmissions have different efficiencies. The weight of your drive shaft, how big your rear end is. If you got a giant, 9-inch rear end, whatever the gearing is. Again, the axles that they're big and heavy, the tires and wheels that they're big and heavy. All of that stuff adds up, and so there's no real number. You short up just installed Gilmer drive alternator belt with the gear drive and turbos. It's going to make all kinds of cool sounds. Yeah, that will have good sound quality. The flap and finger video is excellent. And NASCAR stuff, they run a reverse style bell housing with reverse mount starter, but I'm not trying to find some information with the manual trans I could possibly run with it. It's an 8-bolt big block Chevy crank bolt. Okay. Kazi AETC video. Has anyone done an intercooler under the trunk? I've seen very small radiators run through alloy pipes, and the pipes seem to kill as much temp as a tiny radiator under the trunk mounted flap. I'd be surprised if the tubing does that, but it should all help. As long as it has airflow going by the tubing, maybe that would help. But all the pipe kill boost spool time, or has anyone done it? If you're talking about a remote turbo setup, I have videos up where we tested it. 2 spare tires, 1 spare of everything. Yeah, the trophy trucks are a serious deal. And even just, if that's what you're talking about, and even just the fabrication that you look at. If you look at a control arm or something, look at what they're doing with it. They're bouncing it off rocks and stuff. It's got to be it's all really tough stuff. A control arm obviously doesn't come into play when we're measuring power, but the tire and wheel package definitely does. And so do the axles and the transmission and all that. And the flywheel or torque converter, depending on what they're doing. Does an intercooler always help power? 57% are saying yes. It's always the word always there. That's the red flag. Yeah, I'm not sure if I could even pick up a wheel and tire package and if the truck was up on the hoist, if I could pick it up and throw it on there. Guess I should challenge myself, huh? I was an American Ninja Warrior, so we should be able to do that. Is a sloppy stage 2 cam considered more of a mild cam? It would be a mild cam. It would be a mild-ish cam for a 403. I would count it as a middle of the road cam for a 403. 228 is a pretty good size cam for a 4.8 or a 5.3. Anything up in that higher 220 ranges and in the 230 ranges is big for a regular motor. But a 403 stroker, A 228 cam is, like I said, it's middle, high middle. Looks like the R07 is made for 110 tooth flywheels, Tilton and Quartermaster triple and quad disc clutches. But I've also seen stock Chevy V8 stick bell housings that are compatible. Cool. Intercoolers always help power if size large enough. Now I know that they've run some of those at Westech, so I'm assuming that it's a I don't remember them having a dedicated. I honestly don't remember because I don't remember looking at that. But I didn't think that they had a dedicated bell housing for that to run it on the dyno. Because we run a few of those because the guys from Lucas Oil had a couple of those. Hey, oh. I need to go start up the Metro. I haven't started it for a little while. Now that I think about it, I don't know that I've driven it since we did all of the stuff on the. Since we did all the stuff on the chassis dyno. I need to see. It's got to be running better now. It's got to be making all that 1 liter torque. I was happy when we did the test on the intercooler with the 351. One, I was happy that we could put the 5 liter kit on the 351 because I don't think that they had a 351 kit for some reason. But we already had it, and so I think we had to drill 1 new hole or something. And we only put it on with, I don't know, 2 bolts or 3 bolts or whatever. Just, whatever we got to do to make it work. And then usually the problem is getting it past our electric water pump has been an issue with some of the 5 liter stuff and the Vortec. Getting the Vortec drive and having it miss the Mazir electric water pump was kind of problematic. But having it run on a 351 was cool. I've run lots and lots of them on the Mustang. And like I said, I drove mine on a 302 motor, tested lots of them, along with torque storms and pro chargers and all that stuff too, and Kenny bells. But not on 351s. And so it was kind of, it was just cool because it's different. A fan induction system. I was thinking about putting a little fan on the Sprint one, and then we ended up just changing to an air-to-water intercooler. It was much better. There's currently 3 Dodge V10 non-Viper pickups for sale. How good or bad or awful does anybody know? I've never had any experience with them. I've seen one in a wrecking yard before, but I've not done any testing with them. Have you ever messed with Mini Cooper engines? I have not. I don't even ever remember running. I've never run one of those on the chassis dyno, and I don't remember seeing any. I'm sure that the Westech guys have, but I just don't remember being there when they were running a Mini Cooper. It'd be cool to build an intercooler with liquid nitrogen or helium flowing through it. I wanted to dip the air to air in liquid nitrogen and run a test with that, but it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. R07 uses a few different size flywheels. I've seen 110, 153 for sale, 7.5-inch clutch plates. Got an AR5 adapter kit for an LS and small block. I'd love it to bolt it to an R07. Doesn't the Hellcat run AC coolant lines through the intercooler? The Demons, I think, did. I don't think the Hellcats did. 383 big block, 850 brawler carb on a 69 Charger. Sat over the winter for a while and knows it feels significantly more underpowered and sluggish. Timing to advance at 36 degrees because the jets be clogged. Yeah, you should take a look at that and see. Air fuel meters help you solve a lot of those kinds of problems. But yeah, definitely take a look at the carburetor. Turbo non-Viper V10 on YouTube. Yeah, that should be a torquey thing. I mean, it's a big motor, so it's going to make lots of torque all by itself. And then adding boost to it, that's BNR. The Hellcats have that too. They have that cooling system. Now, is he asking about the AC lines? Though, I didn't think that the Hellcats ran Freon through their stuff. I thought that only the Demon did that. It's the same engine out of the Viper. The V10 truck engines are not the same engines out of the Viper. They did have Viper engines in the SRT10 trucks, but not just the normal V10 trucks. The normal V10 trucks was a different V10. Got just a couple more minutes. There, 360 plus 2. What are those 488s? Is that what the V10 is? V10 Dodge truck motor, 8 liters of pavement ripping torque. Yeah, that's got to be right because 8 times 6 is 48. Yeah. 488. The ethanol fuel is bad about clogging and sticking things if you've left them sitting. Have you run a Hawk sleeper cam on a 5.3? I've never even heard of that. For a stock idle with gains for a turbo build. Not sure if the LS9 cam is the best option for a daily street strip build with 6-speed manual. The LS9 cam will make power at the top on the big end, but it's going to be really soft on a 5.3 and even worse on a 4.8. Holden, you need the shirt? I just found I have in blue and red in the shirts, in these Ron Cam shirts, I have 3X shirts. Those are the only sizes I have left. I just found one large and I think one medium in red. All the rest of them are 3X. Triple X. And Diesel would be proud. Gen 453, I want to put the Stage 4 Summit cam with LS7 lifters and a BTR dual spring. Well, the LS7 lifters handle the RPM and be reliable. Well, if this gives you an answer, Caleb, on the L33, we're using the Wrecking Yard lifters that came with the 200,000 mile motor, and we're running the 7700. And it has more than 100 runs like that. There's a pair of Precision 6266 overkill for an LQ4. No, it just depends on, I mean, the turbo choice is always determined by your desired power output. How much power do you want to make? I don't see any intercoolers on big power cars for a reason. If you're talking about race cars running methanol, then that's because they balance out the weight versus the gain. And on a dedicated drag race car where they're already running methanol, it would be they know that it's beneficial, and they know that it makes more power. The question is, does it make more power to offset the added weight of the intercooler setup to run dry ice and all, or ice water and all that stuff? Usually not, or it's a toss up, or it's not worth it. V10 is 360 plus 2, stroke of 388. Sound like a Greyhound bus. Do you have or plan to do a 6-liter video with an M90? No, not really. I don't know that there's a reason to. I mean, we already did over 600 with it on the 5.3. So we know a 6-liter would also do that if we had the 6-liter making enough NA power to do that. $6,700 to start with the ability turned up, because we all know it's going to happen. Yeah, Sean, those turbos will easily support that. Donald, that you're interested in one of the cams. I'll put my email address down here. Just send me an email. And I'm going to need to order new shirts. I think I'm going to do something different than wrong cam this time. Quick question. How much would you safely put through a stock bottom end boosted LS1 on the street? I've heard 600 horsepower if you're not hard in the car. I would go above that, I think. I wouldn't have any problem going beyond that. What RPM should I rev it to? I was planning 7,000 with a Summit Pro LS pistons and a bit higher compression. Yeah, if you're putting pistons and rods in it, you're not going to have any problem. My question is, what intake manifold and what cylinder heads are you teaming this camshaft with? So where is it going to want to make power? Now, our motor wants to make power up there because it has a big cam. It has a stage 4 LS3 cam from Brian Tooley. It also has really good heads in our fully ported 220 trick flow heads. And it has a short runner intake manifold, the BTR Trinity intake manifold. We've also run the low ram and the high ram, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's why it wants to make power up there. If you have a stock head and a truck intake manifold, it's not going to want it. Even that camshaft is not going to want to make power up where we're talking about. What years in cars were the L98 heads, or only on Vets and Camaros and Firebirds? I don't know when they instituted them on the F-body stuff. I don't know when that became universal, but past 86, they were aluminum heads on the Corvettes. I know in pro stock tractor pullers, they don't turn the water pump for the intercooler until it's over a certain RPM. Otherwise, the cooler air won't let the turbo spool up all the way. So trying to get it spicy really quick and then do it later on. It makes sense. 243 heads on the stock truck intake manifold. Yeah, you don't have to worry about going more than 7,000 RPM then. L98 aluminum only on Corvettes, 86 to 91. They didn't, when they instituted the L98 in the Camaro, it never got aluminum heads. It was always the iron-headed one. What intake would you recommend for that cam? Well, you also don't have enough cylinder head. You have a stock cylinder head too. But a fast manifold would probably be the best average power production for you. Had a C4, nobody cares about anything under 300 horsepower. But you made a lot of torque. Todd, good. I'm glad to hear your work on the truck, man. And 86 convertibles had aluminums. Yeah, that's when they started it. L98 8 heads on a 68 307. So your 68 through 307 might have 64cc chamber heads on it already, right? What are the heads that on it? Do you know what the casting number is on your heads? I mean, on your motor. So iron heads only for the F body. Would ported 706s or ported 243 be better? Yeah, any any sort of ported head, any sort of aftermarket head, good ported aftermarket head, trick flow, airflow research, all of those would help you make power. IROCs and GTAs had iron heads. So Todd, you're relocating the batteries to the back. Cool. Can use a TIC air-to-water intake intercooler on a BTR Trinity intake manifold. Not right now, but later on you might be able to. It was designed for the high ram, and so, but that might be changing. Ever seen a car on the dyno where fuel flows out of the turbo inlet? I have not. Why are they introducing water methanol or something where it's backflowing or something? And is it coming out during the closing of the lift throttle situation or something? Yeah, Todd, if it started before, it should start. It doesn't really take very much to get a motor started. My truck had fuel come out of the turbo when I was over fueling it. Too much pressure. On an EFI LS motor, it had fuel coming out of it. On a port injected motor. Is deck thickness the only major advantage of an aftermarket head versus a stock ported head on a high horsepower boosted application? Yeah, head integrity would be one thing, and also an aftermarket head will flow more than a ported stock head. They have aftermarket heads that flow more than a ported stock head does, and all ported stock heads don't flow the same. Some guys port them incorrectly. Some guys port them a little bit. Some guys port them a medium amount. Some guys are really, really good at it. And then those heads would be something that you could compare to an aftermarket head. But that's not really the question. A good aftermarket head's better than a ported stock head. But are you able to take advantage of whatever that added amount is? If you like, then you better put boost on it, I thought. Mitsubishi Evo, it came out everywhere. Never seen anything like it. Think it may have been a fuel pressure regulator. Yeah, did they break the diaphragm in the regulator or something? Because and then they're just pumping fuel into the intake manifold and into the turbo and stuff. Jared, don't know what you mean by thoughts. And we got 1 more minute, so we're gonna close out our poll. Does intercooler always help power? 54% saying yes, 46% saying no. Had to unbolt the carb, close the floor and fire it up. Yeah, you don't want there to be so much fuel in there that you hydrolock it. That would be bad. Or starter fluid. Yeah, I remember when I was young, we had a guy that was a car guy, and he was dating one of my friend's sisters, and the car had flooded, so he came over to fix it, and he just lit it on fire and just let it burn off. So I'm like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "No, it'll just burn all the gas off, and then it'll be fine. It'll start right up." I'm like, that doesn't sound right. It worked. It just started up. Yeah, Todd, definitely send me a video. Better turbo GT45 or VS7875. If you're looking for 700 wheel horsepower, the 7875 is a better choice. How much can you stroke a 5.3? Most people put a 4-inch stroke in it. That's as much as you would want to go on a stock sleeve length for a 5.3. Are you willing to receive a long-winded email regarding intake runners and some JPEGs? Well, what is it about? I mean, more than what you just said there. Yeah, you can go to, although guys have gone on the iron blocks, they've gone to forge bores. I'm going to try it. Have my fingers crossed. Just bought AFR 265 heads for my 468. Big block. Nice. That's an excellent choice. Are forged pistons mandatory? No. No, what you need to do is, depending on what the duration of the camshaft is, you just need to make sure you have enough piston to valve clearance. Is the hot side the same on the 7875 and the GT45? I don't think that it is. I think that a 7875 is bigger on both sides. You said you safely take a stock bottom end LS1 over 600 horsepower. Is that with standard ring gap? No. That's with ring gap. I count that as a stock bottom end. And if you're running boost on it, you should have ring gap on it. And you're trying to make more than 600 horsepower with boost, you should have ring gap in it. And on that solid note, it is time to go. I will see you guys all tomorrow.